What are we whispering about? Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Claire Casely. I have a podcast called Fairy Whispering. I'm a researcher, an artist. I have an interest in time slips because of my interest in fairies and my fairy research. So in Devon, there are several places where people have seen cottages that when they return, there's nothing there. There's just an empty lot and a pile of rubble. And there's several of these in Devon. So I'm just going to take you through a few of them and share with you some examples of witness accounts of people that I've spoken to, some quite recent time slip accounts that feature cottages. So that's what I'm going to be covering. And that's the little intro about what phantom cottages are. So these are some of the phantom cottages in Devon. And I was really chuffed to find out recently that there's an artist called Ethan Pennell who has created a folklore map of Dartmoor that I'll show you at the end when I finish the presentation. So I'm going to take you through one that's a bit of a case study of one that's close to me in Devon. So I live in Newton Abbot. My house is about a kilometre from a hill fort, and it's a very old landscape. I've got another hill fort the other side of me. This is a cottage that was recorded by Judy Chard in Devon Stories of the Supernatural in 2003. Judy Chard only lived a couple of miles from me. And this was a sighting that a female visitor of hers had on a hot summer's day. It would have been, she wrote the book in 2003, so maybe this would have been the 1990s. Her visitor went for a walk. She'd not been to the area before, and she was walking through a little hamlet called Holbein. And as she was walking through this hamlet, she saw this chocolate box cottage. Those are her words. And she was absolutely mesmerized by it. And she decided to go and visit it again the next day and take her husband back to see it. She returned to the exact spot where the cottage was, and there was nothing there. There was just a pile of rubble. So this is a map from 1888, which shows the cottage, which was called Hantshays by that time. It was recorded on the 1851 census as Heartsease, and it was actually two cottages. And the Tucker family lived there, and a man called Thomas Brucey lived there, who's a widower. So it was an actual cottage. The 1926 electoral rolls was the last record of habitation there, and it's visible on the 1946 RAF aerial photos. So this is the photo from 1946 RAF aerial photo showing the cottage. I think this photo is quite eerie. It's almost like seeing a ghost. The surrounding landscape, so there's the idea of spooky geology, stone tape theory, there's lots of limestone in the area, volcanic rock, and as I said, there's a few hill forts as well. So there's the hill fort of Bury, which is near me, and Denbury Hill Fort is directly opposite where the cottage was. And the old name for the wood at the back of the cottage was called Hobbin's Wood, which is a bit of a fairy connection. And I'm going to be talking a bit more about fairy connection later on in the talk. So I thought I'd do a little bit of research into hill forts and paranormal phenomena. And I was really surprised to see that there was a UFO sighting that's recorded on, this is on a website called Archimaps. And you can look at all the archaeological sites in your area, and it records UFO sightings as well. So there's a UFO sighting in, can't see the date there, but 1999 over that hill fort, which is just a stone's throw from my house. Denbury Hill Fort has lots of hauntings in the village. At Buckfastleigh, there's Hembury Hill Fort, and there's another cottage near there that I'll talk about in a moment. And it's also a very haunted area, and Hill Fort's haunted. And there's the Skoroton mystery, which I covered in one of my podcast episodes a few months ago, which was about a UFO close encounter that a man called Arthur Bryant had with. His account was that a flying saucer landed in a field above the village of Skoroton, and 3 occupants came out that he had interaction with. In Sussex, there's a hill fort called Chanctonbury Ring, which attracts lots of phenomena as well, just as another example. So this is a cottage sighting, excuse me. Let's have a drink. That was recorded by Theo Brown in Devon Ghosts, and also by Ruth St Ledger Gordon. So they're 2 separate accounts by different people. And it was in the parish of Ilsington, in a little hamlet called Brimley. An OS surveyor saw this cottage from the edge of Haytor Vale with smoke coming out of the chimney, but when he went to investigate where this cottage was, he couldn't find it. A separate witness, a woman, walked past the cottage, and when she returned, there was only rubble. I've tried to find the site of where this cottage could be the other day. In a place called Dockham, which is near Morton Hampstead, there was a sighting of a manor house, which was recorded by Theo Brown in Devon Ghosts. A friend of Theo's was out riding past a field gate in daylight, and she saw what she described as a medieval manor house. The remains of this manor house are recorded on this map from 1884. When the woman returned the next day or sometime later, again, there was no house there. And Dockham Manor has a dastardly past, which I don't have time to go into now. In a place called Stoke Fleming, or near Stoke Fleming, 2 women saw a medieval manor house in 1939 appearing before their eyes. They were 2 sisters, and they were out for a walk. And through the woods, they saw a manor house gradually appearing. So this is one of the few cases I've found where people have seen it appearing before their eyes. So again, the site of the manor house is on the maps from 1886. There's a battle site nearby over here, which I've circled in yellow, between the Danes and the Saxons. There's a moonlit and crossroads, all of which have some paranormal links as well. So running water, crossroads, can all add to the supernatural vibe of the landscape, if you like. And there's a story from Sands, which is on the coast, just a bit further around the coast from Stoke Fleming. It's the beach, and it was recorded by the Society of Psychical Research in, I think it's in the 1948 journal. And there's a man who, again, was a visitor to the area, and he was walking along the cliffs above Sands, and he went to climb over a stile and found himself almost falling off a cliff because the landscape that he'd seen the other side of the stile was a phantom landscape. So he nearly fell off the cliff. So the next step up is when people have sightings of cottage occupants. Near Buckfastleigh, there is a cottage that 3 children saw, and this was recorded by John Lloyd Borden Page in 1893 in his book. The 3 children saw an old couple through a cottage window, and this was at night time. They were on the way back from the moors. They'd been out with their father all day. He'd been out hunting, and they were travelling back home. And they saw this scene of this old couple by a fire through this cottage window, and then the scene disappeared before their eyes. Later, when they asked about the cottage, they were told that it was demolished years ago because of the evil deeds that were committed there, but nobody knows what those evil deeds were. In Maliton, I spoke to a witness for my podcast who came on to talk about something else, and he said, "Oh, by the way," this always happens when I finish recording, he said, "Oh, by the way, I've got another experience." And he told me this experience that his father had had in the village of Maliton, which is up on Dartmoor. And there's this beautiful village green. This is one of my photos. And his father worked for the Southwestern Electricity Board. So he was up on the moors doing some work, and he had to go to Maliton one day to do some work in Maliton. And whilst he was in Maliton, he saw through a hedge a beautiful old cottage with 2 women outside. And he was kind of mesmerized by the scene, watching these women and this beautiful old cottage. And he noticed that their dress was Victorian. But he didn't really think any more of it. He just thought, oh, well, maybe they're just a little bit old-fashioned. He went home, came back the next day to carry on with the work that he'd been doing in Maliton, and to his surprise, the cottage that he'd seen the day before was in a completely run-down state, and it looked like no one had lived there for years. This is an experience that my dad had, and I've actually just recently interviewed him for a podcast episode because my dad doesn't believe in the paranormal, yet he's one of those people that seems to attract lots of unusual experiences, what I'd call paranormal experiences. My dad has a friend who lives in Torquay who owns an old cottage. And this was back about 20 years ago. My dad went to see his friend. He parked up outside his friend's house, And this cottage is opposite his friend's house. So his friend owns this cottage, but he doesn't live in it. My dad was just getting ready to go in and see his friend, and he noticed three children in the road that he said were dressed in a sort of old-fashioned way, not very well kept. And he noticed that they were playing with hoops. He got out of the car. Sorry, he was out of the car by this time. He was watching them, and he watched them walk up the lane, and then they disappeared behind a van. And then he was expecting them to reappear again as they walked up the road, but they didn't. So my dad walked around the van. There was nowhere where these children could have gone to. They just somehow vanished into thin air. He went into his friend's house and told him about this experience, and his friend was very quiet. Some time later, his friend said to him, "I've got something to show you." So my dad was intrigued, and his friend pulled out a photograph. And the photograph was an old photograph from Victorian times of the lane with the cottage and three children in the street playing with hoops. That story sends a shiver down my spine. So was my dad experiencing a time slip, or were these ghosts? So come on now to where people actually interact with the occupants of cottages, and the crossovers with fairy folklore. I spoke to a guest a few months ago who shared an experience that her daughter had as a child that she talked about. So I'm just going to play you the experience that this is my guest talking about her daughter and what she experienced as a child.
So where we live, there used to be a little cottage that we used to walk. I used to walk past when I used to go to school, and we used to call her the witch because she had long hair. It was like a rundown little cottage. She used to hang her washing out, and at the front, it was all like weedies and stuff like that. And she lived next to an orchard yard, like apple orchard yard.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I asked Sasha to draw this, what this lady was talking to her about, because she was trying to describe where she lived, and she drew a little house with an orchard next to it and a lady, and she was going, the lady's got long hair, like long grey hair. Now my friend at the time, I rang her up and said, you've got to come over, because like I don't believe what she stated. Like, she wasn't even born when this house got taken down and the orchard yard got taken away, so she wouldn't have known about it.
Oh, so it's like a phantom house she was seeing.
Yeah, but she was describing this, and she said I could smell the apples, and the lady's picking apples, and I can smell the apples that she's picking. And I was like,
interesting experience. I've spoken to my guest again. I said I'd like to speak to her a bit more about this experience, but that's just a brief snippet of someone that was actually interacting with the people that were living in this cottage that had been long ago demolished.
So where we live, they used to...
Trying to get to the next. There we are. Cottages in folklore and fairy tales. There's loads of examples I could give here, but we all know Snow White, Hansel and Gretel, two famous fairy tales that feature cottages and their occupants. From Cornwall, there's some fairy folklore. There's Sorry Cherry of Zena, where a young woman goes off to work for a mysterious man, and he lives down a very long lane in a cottage that's surrounded by gardens and orchards. And it's both a moralistic tale and it features fairies as well. So the idea is that this man is a fairy man that she's working for. And there's another wonderful story called The Fairy Dwelling on Selina Moor by William Bottrell recorded, which I will come back to a bit later. This is another experience from another guest of mine that I spoke to recently, who shared about experience that she'd had when she was 14 with a friend, where they were transported to another season and time and place. And they heard fairy music. So I will play this one. This one's about 10 minutes long, but it's a really good account.
About, I don't know if it was a time slip or
could you share
it's always had essence of fairy with me.
Oh, yeah.
And that happened when I was a teenager.
Oh gosh, I'd love to hear about that if you want to share it. Yeah.
Yeah, so this experience happened, I believe, when I was about 14.
Right.
About 14 years old. It was me and my best friend at the time and my little dog, Ralph. We had a little border terrier called Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
We'd gone off out, as we always did in the summer holidays. We'd be out from sun up to sundown, basically, or as soon as the street lamps are on, you need to come home for your dinner. And we'd gone off out with the dog, and we took a little packed lunch with us and like something to eat and drink and water for the dog. And being teenage girls, we just were walking in our local area where we'd been hundreds of times before, but not really planning anywhere because we were too engrossed in our conversation. And we went to a place not far from where we both lived, across a stile, through a field with horses in that's been there for decades, over another stile, and then there's an alleyway, literally a tight alleyway lined with 2 rows of bushes, like a bush on each side, all the way down, and that would actually come out in the next village. It was like a big long alleyway, like a shortcut, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
But all of a sudden, and there's housing estate on the right-hand side and just fields on the left-hand side. And then, like I said, once you got to the end, you'd come out on the main road and then into another village. So we knew exactly where we were, but we were absent-mindedly just chatting and walking along. All of a sudden, we stepped out what we thought would be the end of the footpath, end of this just straight alleyway. There was no turns, nowhere to go, so we couldn't have gone, a wrong way or anything. And we were in an apple orchard.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, interesting.
To be autumn time. All the trees had no leaves, no foliage on. To the left-hand side of us, there was a little cottage, an old-looking cottage, like a farmhouse cottage.
Right.
And next, there was loads of bee boxes, like a row of bee boxes.
Right, yeah.
And we both became back aware at the exact same moment that we were in this strange place that we had never seen before. And I remember looking up at my friend and saying, "Oh, where are we?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know." So I said, "Well, there's a footpath there. Let's should we just keep going? So we carried on walking. It was just a dirt track through this apple orchard. When we got sort of a little bit further along, it opened up into a little glade or glen, whatever you describe, like a glade. I think that's the right word. Covered in bluebells. Literally, as far as your eye could see, the ground was completely covered in bluebells. And there was the odd tree. It was like a bit of a woodland, but they were really spread out, the trees. And over to the left-hand side of us again was a tiny, the smallest, little derelict chapel. Like a tiny, really tiny little single-story little chapel, like a church chapel thing.
Yeah.
And obviously we had no idea where we were at all, but it was beautiful, really beautiful there. So we decided to just sit for a little while and have our picnic, have our packed lunch. And we sat down on our coats and obviously started eating our sandwiches and things. And all of a sudden, we started hearing music. Now, the only type of music I could ever describe it as closely to, but this isn't quite right, was like medieval flute.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Like old-fashioned flute, definitely a flute.
Yeah.
But even that doesn't quite fit right. It was like music I'd never ever heard before.
Yeah.
But it was in the distance, getting closer to us, coming from the left hand, like towards us from my left hand side. And we both, and the dog, bearing in mind my little dog Ralph barked at everyone and everything. He was silent throughout all of this, which was strange as well. And we just stared off into the distance, listening to this music, getting closer and closer to us. Couldn't see anything, but all of a sudden, a cold blast of air hit us directly in the face, like a cold wind, and the music was as if it was all around us in the wind.
Oh, wow.
And it was as if it scooped us up and pushed us back towards the apple orchard. It did not want us to be there.
Right, yeah.
And even though we didn't physically see anything, I've always thought it could have been a time slip, or we stepped, because we were so absent-mindedly just chatting, not thinking about where we were going, we stepped into like another realm or another dimension or something, like we'd gone onto a fairy path or something.
Yeah.
And we gathered our things as quickly as I think I ever have, and we legged it back through to the apple orchard, all the way back through to the alleyway and all the way back home. And we didn't actually stop and talk about what happened until we got back to my house. Because it frightened us so much.
Wow.
So yeah, but we've both said, I think that was fairies. They didn't want us there. And the strange thing after as well was the apple orchard was like in autumn time, but yet we walked into a field of bluebells.
I see, yeah. Which is May, isn't it? That's like...
And it's midsummer. It was the summer holidays when this happened.
Right. So
again, the seasons didn't
match up. Yeah.
Up properly, but we didn't notice that, and we didn't see anybody. We didn't hear anybody. All we noticed was the music and this cold wind, and it was literally as if it scooped us all up, all of our things, and pushed us away. Go away. You're not welcome here. You've got to get out. So yeah, that was just an experience. And me and my friend, we searched and searched and searched for that apple orchard, for that bluebell glade. We never, ever, ever found it again. Every time we walked that same route through the alleyway, it came out in the next village, exactly as it was. We asked people, was there an apple orchard there at one point? Don't know. The houses on that side, on the right-hand side, have been there for so long, no one can remember, you know, what was before. But the little chapel, the cottage, the bee boxes doesn't exist. Wherever we were, it was there for that moment, and we never found it again. And we searched and searched for it.
I just think that is a brilliant share, and you know, a modern example of these experiences where people see places and then try and find them again, and they're not there. Okay. So there are echoes of these experiences in folklore. As I mentioned, there's the fairy dwelling on Selina Moor, which this is where I start to wonder how much these stories draw on actual experiences. You know, there are sort of elements of morality tales in these old folklore stories, but the fact that these experiences are very similar to these kind of time slip experiences that people have reported in modern times does make me wonder what's going on here. Are there some elements of people having these experiences in the past and then they become part of our folklore record? So William Bottrell recorded this story, as I said, in Traditions and Hearthside Stories of the West of Cornwall. And it's the story of a man called Mr. Noy, who was a widower, and he'd been helping out in the preparations for the harvest celebrations. So it was harvest festival time, Lammas, and it was the eve of Lammas. Mr. Noy, he'd been to the pub to celebrate with the other workers, preparing for the celebrations, and he rode out onto Selina Moor, which is a small area of moorland in Cornwall, with his dogs. He was on his horseback, and his horse decided to go a different way home and entered some thick woodland, and the branches were getting lower and lower and lower, and the woodland was thicker and thicker and thicker, till Mr. Noy had to get off of his horse and lead his horse through the woods. And as he was walking through the woods, wondering where he was, feeling totally bewildered and pixelated, he saw ahead of him some lights through the trees, and then started to hear the faint strains of music. And all of a sudden, the woodland opened out into an orchard. And he came to this orchard, and then he was still seeing these lights and hearing this music through the trees. And the orchard opened out into a meadow. And at the edge of the meadow, there was a cottage with a woman who was stood beside or near the cottage, and she was playing a tambourine to keep time of the dancers that were dancing and celebrating. And then Mr. Noy noticed that these were quite small people that were dancing, and he realised that these were pixies, or the fairies. And then as he looked at the woman and the woman turned to him, he realised that she was his fiancée that he thought had died several years before. And she saw him and she looked alarmed, and she quickly came to him and said, "You shouldn't be here." And he said, "Well, I'm feeling hungry, I'm feeling thirsty." And she said, "You mustn't eat anything, you mustn't drink anything while you're here." She said, "That was my mistake. I found this place, I came to this place and I ate some of the fruit. And then that was it. I couldn't return to the mortal world. I couldn't return to my old life. I'm captive here." So she quickly directed Mr. Noy out of the meadow, back through the orchard, back through the woods. And about 3 days, he'd been missing for 3 days, and the village people were looking for him for 3 days, and he sent out a search party. And eventually on the 3rd day, they heard some dogs barking and a horse neighing in this area of the moorland that was full of thick gorse bushes and small gnarled trees, very impenetrable area of the moorland. So they fought their way through, and they found Mr. Noy lying. He was passed out in this cowshed, the ruins of a cowshed. They woke him up, and he relayed the story of what had happened to him. So I just think there's some crossovers there with the accounts that we've just heard and this old folklore tale of this man entering this other realm, entering this fairy realm, but being rescued in time and brought back to the human world. So what happens if people go into these places? This is a brilliant story called The Evil Manor House, which was full of wickedness. And I found this story in Devonshire Folk Tales by Michael Dacre, or Dacre. It was in the area of Dalton. It was originally recorded by Catherine Briggs. And this house was witnessed by a father and son, and the story was retold by the son, Mr. Ackroyd, when he was a man. So when Mr. Ackroyd was a little boy, it was Christmas time. He and his father were staying in the area around Dalton, and they'd been out for the day. There was fresh fallen snow, and they were on the way back to where they were staying, and they were drawn to go down this little lane. The horses wanted to go down this little lane, take them down this dark road, and the only way they could see where they were going was by the snow on the road. And as they approached, they could see and hear. They could hear music, and they could see lights through the woods. And they started to see the form of this big manor house. It's like a medieval manor house. And the windows were all lit up by candlelight, and there were people that were obviously dancing and partying. The father approached the footman that was on the doorstep of the house and asked for directions, and the footman called the owner of the house, who invited he and the boy in. But the father felt slightly nervous about going in, and something didn't feel right, and he said that they needed to get on, they needed to get home. So the owner of the house said, well, my footman will see you back safely to the main road, to the main path. So the footman saw them back to where they right onto the right road, and the father, for his trouble, decided to give the footman half a crown. The boy noticed that the half a crown fell through the hand of the footman into the snow. And he said further along the lane with his father, he said, did you notice that? The crown falling through the footman's hand. And his father said, yes, I noticed that. And they inquired in the area, and they found out that the house had a bad reputation. It was known as an evil house full of wickedness, but it no longer stood there. It was from a long time ago. So again, I did a little bit of research and found quite a few manor houses in the area of Dalton. Might have been this one because there's woodland, who knows? It's interesting that there are manor houses in that area, and these maps are from the Library of Scotland, which is a brilliant resource. I'm going to show this video at the end because I can't show it in this slideshow. At Chagford, there's a house that appears every 10 to 12 years. And this was recorded by Elliot O'Donnell in Haunted Britain. He speaks of two women who were walking near Chagford and saw two picturesque cottages. They knocked on the door because they thought, well, this would be a nice place to stay. A little girl answered the door, invited the women in, and they went and waited in a parlour. There was a white cat with very green eyes and a strange looking black bird in a gilded cage. The mother of the girl came to greet the women and said that sadly there wasn't any room in the cottage for them to stay and to come back next summer. So the women returned the following summer to find these cottages, and there was nothing to be seen in the place where the cottages stood. When they inquired locally, the locals said that will be the vanishing cottages. So this is an example of a cycle of time, because the locals said that these cottages appear every 10 to 12 years. So some of these places seem to have a cycle that they appear every few years. There's another one that Theo Brown spoke about in her Devon Ghosts book about a cottage near Cadley that appears every 3 years. Cadley's near Tiverton in Devon. So there's a few theories about what this all could be about. Is it the mindset of the witness? A lot of these people didn't expect to see these places. Perhaps they're visitors to the place. Maybe they're on holiday. They'd never been before. There's theories that it could be the biofield of the witness interacting with the place. This was a theory put forward by P.C. Lethbridge. The idea of spooky geology, that rocks somehow emit some kind of energy that creates this paranormal phenomena. Or the stone tape theory that stones somehow record historical events, especially events that have high emotions in them, like battles or murders. And there's time slips. I could do a whole talk about time slips, so I'm not going to go too much into detail about those, and ley lines. There's a really brilliant investigation of the Rowan mystery, which is in the east of England, and it was by Carl Grove, written in 2015. You can find it online. And these are some of the theories that he puts forward through his research. So, this is just a small selection of them. The idea of collective hallucinations, whether the witness was mistaken or disorientated, but the fact that they found some remains seems to contradict, remains of the places seems to contradict this. where people seeing visions of the past. So, for example, we can access that through remote viewing. A time slip or a time warp or a parallel universe. Virtual reality. There's loads of them. It's so, no one really knows, but there's some various ideas. There are some ley lines that go through Dartmoor that the cottages sit either side of. So there's the St Michael line and the Ash Ridge line, if you believe in ley lines. It's quite interesting that they pass the cottages that are on Dartmoor seem to be quite close to these lines. And this is another video I'm going to show later. So other UK environmental hauntings, if you're interested in this topic, I can recommend Andrew Mackenzie's books if you can get hold of them. So very rare nowadays, but I've managed to get the Seen and Unseen. I'd love a copy of Adventures in Time. There's the Rowan Mystery, which you can find online. Time Storms by Jenny Randalls is brilliant. The Paranormal Database is fantastic for environmental hauntings. And there's also the Dartmoor Folklore Map by Ethan Pennell, who's going to be a future guest of mine. We're going to go out and find some haunted places together on his map. So I'll show you that in a moment when I come out of the presentation. So what do you think? Time slips, mirages, parallel realities, ghosts of the past? Interested to hear what your ideas are.